I think everybody deserves and needs therapy, at least of some kind. But I think therapy is fundamentally flawed in a lot of ways, which we'll get into later in the video. But let's talk about what are the things that people are using now for therapy, why therapy is something that people need, and then eventually talk about how AI might fit into this in a weird, potentially dangerous way. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody needs therapy. I think the problem with humanity is that we are, running headfirst into new technologies, into a global, massive organism of 8 billion, 9 billion people who are trying to figure out how they fit into the society alongside these internet technologies and devices that are changing our lives on a daily basis, and they're changing and they're causing all these like societal and political and economic socioeconomic changes that we are barely equipped to grapple with. I mean, you could argue that for, let's say, 5,000 years or 2,000 years even, maybe more accurately, humanity stayed relatively the same in terms of all the things that we were interacting with in terms of technology, right? Like maybe you had introductions of some things like different types of agriculture or trade or what have you, but generally it's been the last 200 to 100 years that have seen such a massive acceleration, and our culture in a lot of ways hasn't quite caught up to that. And I think that's kind of where I see therapy coming in helping people, especially modern people, to grapple with that reality. Not to mention that, yes, religion has been a therapy for arguably hundreds, if not thousands of years, but religion has been trapped by old school values, has been, arguably trapped by patriarchy and misogyny, holding us back in terms of values that maybe are not productive for society. There's also definitely arguments for why religion has been helpful. It's community, which people need. Maybe community is actually the true replacement for therapy. It's also, created, familial stability in certain ways, and also structure in society and a funnel for money, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, religion also has it. A lot of these religions grew up in a sense of the universe, a sense of reality based on, very old senses of physics or pre-physics, right? And so I think therapy comes out of a scientific and a humanist tradition, a Freudian tradition, Jungian, et cetera, tradition that approaches the brain, the mind, neuroscience, et cetera, in my opinion, a more scientific, a more healthy way. And it's clearly helping people, right? Especially in cosmopolitan cities around the world. People are going to therapy and it's helping them to cope with, divorce, helping them cope with family matters, friend matters, helping them to cope with their own internal issues of, maybe they are grappling with their own sexuality or just dealing with feeling alone, right? Or dealing with feeling isolated by society or their community, etc. And so I think, not to mention that things like the pandemic, right? And even people's own just PTSD, why not therapy? Because therapy does help with those things specifically. There's studies around PTSD and therapists are trained in working with that with people, right? And I'm not sure that religions are necessarily, equipped to cope with things like that. If anything, they have a lot of times pushed people into therapy. And so I think there is, at least for me, with my bias, I really do think that therapy is something that people should have. They should do. And I think everybody needs it. Unfortunately, we can't scale that amount of people. We have 8 billion people on Earth and more coming. And how do you develop a therapeutic system where you're only training maybe 100,000, 200,000, maybe max 1 million therapists a year? At the same time, you have like entire cultures and societies which are opposed to therapy because doing therapy is an admittance that something is wrong with you. And how people view like losing face and pride and ego and patriarchy and all of that is resistant to the idea of therapy, which admits that there's something wrong with me. It's always the people who go to therapy always kind of go too late, right? And or go when it's, when things have kind of percolated to a place where maybe they should have gotten therapy way earlier. And so to me, I think religion isn't necessarily the solution, especially with things that maybe religion is not equipped for, while at the same time like supporting values that are not really kind of based in a scientific or humanist or therapeutic sense or psychological sense or neuroscience sense of how the brain and the psyche and the psychology works of a person. At the same time, people also use social media as a therapist, right? Because we kind of view therapy as like, hey, I just go there to vent, and hey, social media, I can go to vent. And I don't think that's a healthy place to therapize oneself either, especially because if anything, you just go into your bubbles and you get into more psychosis because now you're hanging out with other, hurt people, right? You're hanging out with other people that might have, symbiotic psychosis with you, and you're just spinning out further. Maybe you're fighting other people and your ego puffs up even more. You're not able to reflect on yourself. And so social media and the internet, if anything, is causing more people to need therapy than it is as a help for therapy, despite the fact that it does help people to find community and family and connect with their friends, etc. At the same time, the way that social media works today is not really helping either. And then there's like psychedelics as well, right? Where psychedelics is where a lot of people are hoping that psychology comes in and therapy comes in. And, I love psychedelics as well, but I think the problem with psychedelics is that it's not very safe, right? Like the dosage, you could give someone a bunch of shrooms or LSD or ayahuasca or whatever. That doesn't scale. It scales even worse than therapy, right? At least with therapy, I can train a bunch of therapists, albeit that it does take time to find the right therapist for you. But the science around psychedelics today is so early that, a lot of people take psychedelics and it makes them worse, right? Because these are dangerous chemicals that are entering your brain. We don't understand them very well. As much as I've benefited, I feel, from them, and a lot of people I know, it's also like a really powerful thing. Like you could give someone, X amount of grams of shrooms home and they accidentally take a full bottle and they're tripping balls and they end up, seeing God or things that they're not prepared for. This is why, ayahuasca ceremonies and these types of ceremonies, iboga and etc. for decades, for hundreds of years, even maybe even thousands of years, have been under the supervision of shamans and medicine people, right? Our plant medicine people who are very experienced in this. And even then, how good are they? It's just like back to the kind of therapist issue of, is this the right type of fit? So psychedelics doesn't scale, right? Or it won't scale fast enough to face the 8 billion problems that we have on Earth. And then you have meditation, right? Which, to be honest, I got into meditation 20, 30 years ago, and I thought, this was the solution for at least a lot of humanity's problems. And that with the advent of kind of MBSR and these other kind of stealth Buddhist or stealth meditation techniques, or like yoga even, which kind of make meditation more palatable to the masses, like this whole mindfulness movement, that also hasn't quite panned out, right? Meditation is hard. It's hard to have discipline to keep at it. It's also like not easy to do the right type of meditation, right? There's so many styles, and the studies around meditation are also very, very early. So it's unclear what their impact is. And I actually know people who have had psychosis and meditation made it worse for them. And so even meditation doesn't quite scale, and it's very specific. It's coded in religiosity, etc. And so I don't know how that solves that problem. The fact of the matter, though, to me, is that we have a mental health crisis globally. We have a population of humans who have been relatively the same brain-wise for thousands of years, and culture-wise, hundreds of years. Our school systems, our infrastructure is all a result of industrialization and things that happened before that. Our legal system as well. So we are in a society that we created over the course of tens of thousands of years, but we have had these same bodies and brains for, hundreds of thousands of years. And now we're grappling with technologies that we can barely even understand. And we don't have a mental health solution to this because it's going to get wild, right? It's already getting wild. People are not getting married. They're not having kids. We're having socioeconomic strife. We're having political clashing. We're having people fight. The biggest and most powerful people in the world are egotists, narcissists, right? So like, what is going on and how do we solve that? And I wonder, predictably, if you watch my channel, does AI come into this? And is AI really a solution to this problem? I mean, like, there are people who have committed suicide or gone into very dark mental health places because of AI, because of communicating with AI, because AI is this specter, is this entity that we can project onto. It is a reflection of us in a lot of ways, but also it is imbued with this intelligence that we gave it, so to speak. And then we interact with it and we assume that it's alive. We assume that it has consciousness. A lot of people do. And a lot of people think that we already have AGI in some ways, and maybe they don't necessarily think that we have consciousness, but we already had people who thought, robots and AI were alive a few years ago. What does that look like in the next few years? Especially as AI becomes more and more intelligent and even more godlike. Do we start treating AI like it is a god? And what are the implications of that? So like, we're going to go from having very few healthy solutions to mental health problems, a la therapy, to a entity or a series of entities that can become our therapist, but is also simultaneously very dangerous. So on one side, I think, hey, it makes sense that people are going to AI like a therapist. It makes sense that I'm going to go to ChatGPT and ask it, if I have a skin problem, what is the problem before I go to the doctor? Or if I have some kind of mental health problem that I'm facing, maybe I'm facing depression, and I go to ChatGPT and I talk to ChatGPT, and it might make me feel better because it's generally tuned to be more optimistic, right? And it might even point me in the direction of a real therapist. But that might be happening en masse, and people might start to treat, if not already, en masse, we're going to start seeing people treat AI like their therapists. And the interesting thing is that we're going to see this happen in cultures, like I mentioned earlier, which are resistant to therapy, because therapy has this, idea that, hey, I'm admitting to myself that I have a problem and that I have some mental health issue and then I have to solve it, which is a very humiliating for some and humbling for others. But with an AI, all I have to do is whip out my phone. No one knows that I'm using it, potentially, and it's just me. And I don't have to have the feeling that another person is being let into my world. I mean, with therapy, the problem to me is that therapy only works when the person recognizes that they have some issues or wants to develop their own self-awareness and then goes and seeks out someone else to help point them out. They have to be willing to be naked to some extent in order to grow. And with AI, you don't need to be naked necessarily, or you can be completely naked because there's no human there. Just the idea that a human could see even a part of me can be intimidating for a lot of people. And so I do wonder where that's headed. On one side, I'm optimistic that, hey, a lot of people will be therapized by something, that's not religion, social media, psychedelics, and a therapist. And of course, therapists are hard to find, right? You have to go through 5 to 10 therapists before you find the one that's good for you. And even that might only last for a few years before you need to go on to another therapist, because it's phases, it's time-based. It's like getting into a marriage in some ways. The AI doesn't have that limitation either, right? It doesn't have the limitation of even having to force you to meditate. All you have to do is talk to it, right? So I really wonder what that is going to do. I wonder how people are going to react to that. It's just really fascinating. Now, there is that hope that I have that maybe it helps people to deal with their issues, because the AI will have more of a sense of who you are and be able to identify what psychological issues you may have. But it might also have the opposite effect of reinforcing your ego, right? And reinforcing your psychosis, right? And which has happened with a lot of people. So I really wonder where that's going to go. I'm curious what you guys think out there. And if you've even used AI as a therapist. I mean, people use it as a coach, right? They use it as an assistant. And so it's not far off to start using it as a brainstormer and then a therapist. So yeah, curious what you think. Let me know.